The air in the hallway felt electric with possibility. I was standing outside my apartment with the Millers, a lovely couple who seemed to appreciate the building's security, qualities I had worked tirelessly to afford. This wasn't just an apartment, it was a fortress I had built with my own 2 hands, my one true sanctuary from the world. I smiled, turning the key in the lock. "I apologize in advance for any clutter," I said, feeling a swell of pride that was about to be utterly shattered. But the door swung open to a scene of total violation. A blast of cheap air freshener and old takeout hit me first. My carefully chosen furniture, pieces I had saved for months to buy, were shoved carelessly against the walls. And there, where my favorite painting used to hang, was a monstrously large television I had never seen before. My space, my entire peaceful world, felt alien and cheapened in an instant. It was like a stranger was wearing my skin. And then I saw them. My sister, Amber, the family's dazzling but helpless golden child, was sprawled on my couch next to her fiancé, Kyle. They were watching TV, surrounded by a sea of their own shopping bags and clothes. Amber glanced up, her expression not one of guilt, but of mild annoyance at being interrupted. The Millers, their faces a mask of horror, muttered a hasty excuse and practically fled down the hall. My dignity vanished right along with them. I closed the door, the click echoing in the tense silence. My voice was barely a whisper when I finally asked what was going on. Amber just shrugged, reaching for a bag of chips without taking her eyes off the screen. "What's the big deal?" "Mom gave us a key," she said, her tone dripping with unearned confidence. "She said you wouldn't mind us staying here to save for the wedding." And the worst part? As I stood there, watching my home get colonized by my sister's entitlement, I wasn't even surprised. It was just the loudest echo of a story I had been living my whole life. Lying on my friend's couch that night, the silence of her apartment felt deafening. The anger hadn't hit me yet. That would come later. For now, all I felt was the cold, heavy weight of resignation. To understand why I didn't scream, why I didn't cry, or immediately call my mother to rage at her. You'd have to understand the family I grew up in. You'd have to understand the sun, and the shadow it casts. My sister Amber was the sun. She was the family's dazzling, charismatic but tragically helpless golden child. We all revolved around her gravity, and her warmth could be incredible, unless you were the one left standing in her shade. I remember when she was 22, the same age I was when I put the down payment on my apartment. Amber had decided she was going to be a travel influencer. It was a fleeting whim, like all her others, but my parents treated it like a divine calling. They took a significant chunk of their retirement savings and bought her a professional camera, lenses, a new laptop, the whole package. They then funded a month-long content creation trip to Bali. I watched them at the airport, their faces glowing with pride, as if she were a scholar heading off on a research grant. Amber came back with a great tan, a mountain of credit card debt, and almost zero usable content. My parents just smiled and called it a valuable life experience. A few months later, it was my 22nd birthday. I was working a full-time office job and taking night classes to get a certification, and my beat-up old car was on its last legs. I sat my parents down at the kitchen table and asked, not for a gift, but if they would consider co-signing a small $5,000 loan so I could get a reliable used car. I had the down payment saved myself. I had a spreadsheet of my budget. I just needed their help with the credit. I watched their faces tighten. And as they prepared their answer, my mind started an involuntary accounting, my internal ledger. I didn't just see the $5,000 I was asking for. I saw the $10,000 Bali trip, the designer handbag for Amber's birthday, the countless times they'd loaned her rent money she never paid back. I saw a decade of their excuses. Their refusal, when it came, was wrapped in a compliment that felt like a slap. "Oh, honey, money is just too tight right now," my father said. Then came the finishing blow from my mother, Carol, a woman who mistook her son's dependence for love and her daughter's independence for coldness. "Besides," she said, patting my hand, "you're just so capable. You always figure things out on your own." It was the ultimate paradox of my childhood. My competence was the very reason I was neglected, while Amber's incompetence was the reason she was rewarded. My strength was my punishment. That was the central myth of our family, the false narrative my mother crafted to justify the blatant favoritism. Amber wasn't irresponsible, she was a free spirit. I wasn't disciplined, I was rigid and unadventurous. When Amber failed a class, it was because the professor was unfair. When I got a scholarship, it was because I was just naturally smart and didn't require effort. They painted her as the fragile artist who needed constant protection from the harsh realities of the world, and me as the stoic provider who was somehow born with a full set of armor. They never once stopped to think about who forced me to build it. So, that apartment, it was never just an apartment to me. It was my declaration of independence, my escape pod from their suffocating narrative. Every extra shift I worked, every weekend I gave up, every cheap meal I ate to save money, it all went into that down payment. I was so fiercely proud that I had done it completely on my own. When I gave my mom a spare key, I made it explicitly clear, looking her directly in the eye, that it was for a true emergency only. A fire, a flood, a medical crisis. A trust I now realized was completely one-sided. Lying there on that lumpy couch, the humiliation burning in my gut, I realized they would never see this apartment as mine. They saw it as just another family resource, another asset to be diverted to the golden child. It was my Bali, and Amber was entitled to it because she was Amber. She needed it, and I, being so capable, would simply figure it out. But this time I thought, as a cold, hard clarity began to form in my mind, they were right. I was going to figure it out. I decided then and there that they would all finally learn the meaning of ownership. The next morning, I woke up on my friend's couch, and the first thing I felt wasn't sadness or anger. It was a strange, unnerving calm. My phone had been buzzing all night with a predictable series of texts, first from Amber demanding to know where I was, then from my mother, a mix of fake concern and subtle guilt-tripping about family harmony. I picked up the phone, looked at their names on the screen, and felt absolutely nothing. The emotional part of me had finally short-circuited. There would be no screaming matches, no tearful phone calls, no desperate pleas for them to see my side of things. I was done with all that. I was done playing their game. They were experts in the currency of emotion and manipulation. They knew how to twist my hurt into drama, my anger into hysteria, my boundaries into cruelty. They were waiting for me to engage on that battlefield, a field where they had held the high ground my entire life. So, I decided to change the terms of surrender. This was no longer a family dispute. It was a business transaction. It was a property issue. In this equation, I wasn't the overlooked daughter or the resentful sister anymore. I was simply the homeowner, and they were simply unauthorized occupants. That entire day was spent gathering my receipts, not the emotional ones. I'd been collecting for years, but cold, hard, undeniable proof. I logged into my laptop and pulled up the digital deed to my apartment. The PDF, a stark black and white testament to my sole ownership. I spent hours deep in legal websites, my screen glowing in the dark room as I researched local tenancy laws, highlighting phrases like guest versus tenant and unlawful detainer. Then came the final piece. I scrolled back, and back, and back through a year of texts with my mother until I found it. A simple message from when I first gave her the key, timestamp and all. Just for a real emergency, sweetie. Promise. I took a screenshot. It felt like finding the murder weapon. I knew calling the police would be a mistake. They would lie. They would perform, putting on a show of tears and confusion, and it would devolve into a messy domestic dispute that the cops wouldn't want to touch. My family's power was in chaos and plausible deniability. My power, I realized, had to come from the system, from paperwork, from statutes, from a process that had no room for emotion. The one call I needed to make wasn't to 911. It was to someone who spoke the language of legal consequences, a professional who couldn't be manipulated by a sob story. I had the proof. I had the plan. All that was left was to choose the right moment to burn their perfect world to the ground. The hardest part wasn't making the call. It was waiting. I gave them 1 full week of silence, a week for them to get comfortable, to truly settle in and believe they had won. I imagined them unpacking the last of their boxes, changing the mailing address on their credit card bills, maybe even buying a new welcome mat for my front door. In their minds, my silence wasn't a threat. It was acceptance. It was me, the ever-capable one, figuring it out on my own just like I always did. They couldn't have known that my silence wasn't surrender. It was the patient, focused calm of a predator that has its prey exactly where it wants it. Every quiet hour that passed was just another foot of rope I was giving them to hang themselves with. On the 8th day, I sat at my friend's kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop. I opened the website for the property law firm I had found, the one with the ruthless reviews. I dialed the number. There was no drama, no hesitation in my voice. I was calm and polite as I explained the situation to the paralegal, referring to the occupants not as my sister and her fiancé, but as two unauthorized individuals. I read my credit card number into the phone to pay the retainer. I emailed the copies of my deed and the screenshot of my mother's text. When the lawyer came on the line to confirm the details, I gave him the green light. The entire act of setting an avalanche in motion was as mundane as ordering a pizza. I can picture the scene so clearly in my head, the moment the real world finally arrived at their door. Amber would have answered the sharp official knock expecting a package or a food delivery. Instead, she'd find a man in a cheap suit holding a clipboard. He wouldn't smile. He would simply confirm her name and hand her a folded document. "You've been served," he would say, his tone flat and bored, before turning and walking away without another word. I imagine her confusion turning to disbelief as she unfolded the paper, and saw the bold, terrifying words at the top. Notice to quit. The legal jargon, the court seals, the sheer impersonal weight of the document. It would have been like a message from a planet she didn't know existed. The first call came exactly 7 minutes later. It was Amber, and her voice was a symphony of chaos. First came the baffled confusion. There was a man at the door. He gave me some weird legal papers. Is this a joke? When I didn't answer, the confusion curdled into sputtering rage. Did you do this? How could you? You can't evict me, I live here now. And then, when my continued silence met her fury, the dam finally broke. And the rage dissolved into the familiar pleading sobs of a child. "Please," she cried, her voice cracking. "You're going to make us homeless. My wedding is in 3 months. You can't do this to me, to your own sister." Throughout her entire tirade, I felt my heartbeat stay slow and steady. I let her exhaust herself, and when she finally paused to take a breath, my voice was quiet and even. "You are not a tenant, Amber. You are an illegal occupant in my property," I stated, the words feeling foreign and powerful on my tongue. "As per the notice you received, you have 72 hours to vacate the premises before formal eviction proceedings are filed with the court." She started to scream again, something about family, but I just spoke over her. "This is not a negotiation." Of course, the next call was from my mother. She skipped the confusion and went straight for the jugular, her voice shaking with manufactured outrage. "What have you done? I am your mother, and I told her she could stay there. You are tearing this family apart over a stupid apartment." This was the moment I had been waiting for my entire life. The final boss battle. I let her finish, and then I delivered the line that severed the last puppet string. "You do not have the legal authority to give away my property, Mom." I said it calmly, with no anger. "Your feelings do not override a deed. Stay out of it." It was a full sentence. It was a locked door. I hung up before she could respond. Then, I opened my phone and blocked both of their numbers. The reality of their situation would be crashing down on them now. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. An eviction on their record would destroy their credit for years, making it impossible to rent another apartment, get a mortgage, or even a car loan. Kyle, her fiancé, would be realizing that the free ride was over and that his future wife. His entitlement came with a legal and financial price tag he was not prepared to pay. Their perfect little fantasy was collapsing into a pile of paperwork. And in the ringing silence, I didn't feel anger or even satisfaction. I just felt quiet. For the first time, I was the one who got to walk away. They had 48 hours left on the clock when they finally vacated. I didn't go there to supervise or to watch them leave. I simply stayed away, letting the legal deadline do its work. I can only imagine the chaos of those 2 days, the frantic packing, the bitter whispered arguments, as the reality of their shared future began to crumble under the weight of a moving box. They were no longer the carefree couple saving for a dream wedding. They were Just two people scrambling to escape the consequences of a bad decision. Their entitlement had finally hit a wall, and all that was left was the frantic, undignified retreat. I knew, without even seeing it, that they would not leave gracefully. They would leave a scar on the place to punish me for my audacity. When I finally walked through the door a day later, the silence was the first thing I noticed. The horrible oversized TV was gone, leaving a gaping wound of brackets and bolts in my wall. The air was stale, and a layer of filth and discarded trash covered the floors. They'd left ketchup smeared on the kitchen counter, and a deep scratch in the hardwood. It was a final, petty tantrum, but as I stood there in the middle of the mess, I didn't feel the sting of anger I expected. I just felt pity. This pathetic little disaster was the last gasp of their power over me. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and made 2 calls. The first was to a deep cleaning service. The second was to a locksmith. The cost of it all was the best money I ever spent. A final closing entry in my internal ledger, marked paid in full. Within a week, the flying monkeys were deployed. My phone lit up with calls and texts from aunts and uncles, all of them. Fed the carefully curated sob story from my mother about my cruelty. They spoke of family loyalty, of forgiveness, of how Amber was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I listened to one voicemail from my aunt before I decided I'd had enough. I drafted a single polite message and sent it to the family group chat. For those who have heard a one-sided story, it read, "Please know my actions were legal, necessary, and are now concluded. I will not be discussing this private matter any further." The response was immediate and shocked silence. I had refused to play my part. I had refused to be the villain in their drama. And so, the show could not go on. A year passed. A year of quiet, uninterrupted, glorious peace. The first thing I did after changing the locks was have the walls repainted, erasing the last physical trace of their presence. Now, a beautiful piece of art from a local artist hangs where their television used to be. My plants are thriving in the sunlight by the window, and the scratch on the floor is covered by a beautiful rug I bought myself on a whim. My apartment is no longer a fortress or an escape pod, it's simply my home, a place where I can breathe. I host small dinner parties for my real friends, the people who celebrate my strength instead of using it as an excuse to neglect me. I was even promoted at work, my mind finally free from the constant background noise of my family's chaos. About 6 months ago, I got a call from a cousin I've always been close with. She was the one who told me the final chapter of Amber and Kyle's story. Just as I suspected, they never made it to the altar. The stress of the near eviction, coupled with the sudden crushing reality of their financial situation, shattered their fantasy. Kyle, my cousin said, told Amber he couldn't sign up for a lifetime of bailouts, and that he needed a partner, not a project. The breakup was messy. And Amber, the golden child who was too special for the real world, ended up moving back into her childhood bedroom, her wings clipped by the very parents who had refused to ever let her learn to fly on her own. Her grand adventure was over. My mother still tries to reach me, of course. About once a month, an email will pop up in my inbox. I never open them, but the subject lines tell the whole story. "Thinking of you," or "Can we please just talk?" or the classic, "Your sister really misses you." Early on, I created a special filter. Now her messages bypass my inbox entirely and go directly into a folder labeled Archive, which I never ever open. It's my last line of defense, a digital boundary she will never be able to cross. Her power, her narrative, her guilt, it all just sits in a little unread file, gathering digital dust. Looking back, I realized that the one call I made wasn't just to a lawyer. It was a call to myself. It was me, finally answering my own plea to be protected, to be defended, to be valued. I had spent my whole life being the responsible one, the strong one, the one who could handle it. It turns out I was right. I could handle it. I just had to stop handling it for everyone else. I learned that a key is about trust, and a home is about peace. I had to change the locks on both to finally find my own. If you've ever had to become your own hero to protect your peace, leave a comment below. I see you.